in our little world. It seems to be like 20 years behind the mainstream discourse on this stuff, really.
It's weird, like I don't know, like I've always felt that it looks, the action sports world looks too much in on itself and doesn't use the what I'm trying to say is, like, I look at the world with a surfing lens, right? Like, I look at everything out there and it goes through a surfing lens for me. And I feel like you can look at these very complicated issues through that prism, basically. And it helps me understand and make sense of it all. And I don't know why the media, the action sports media, doesn't do that. They don't look at real world issues and how it impacts our lives through these prisms. Everything from environmentalism, which, gets some play, but not nearly as much as it probably should, to having child labor overseas, kids making wetsuits or whatever, and like, we should be exploring real world issues through the lens of surfing or skating or snowboarding. I think it's a great way to make sense of it all and get a message out to people and have a good debate too. That's where I don't understand. And that's why I feel like a lot of times the media in these sports are so boring and why a lot of them have failed.
Yeah. And I mean, I would even probably not agree with the word should, but but what I think is there's just room for it. There's room to do both of those things.
True.
Like because I've actually got a lot of experience of pitching this stuff. It probably won't surprise you to hear, and getting knocked back over like 30 years. I've always been interested in this. I've always had the view that you just really, succinctly put out there. I agree with you on that. Like, I agree that for me, they're brilliant lenses through which to examine all these issues because it is my life. I have made this thing my life. And I look at the world through the lens of these cultures. So why would I not look at these other areas of the world through the lens of these cultures as well? And over the years, I've pitched a lot of stuff. And I mean, I remember once a good friend of mine who ran a snowboard mag said to me, like, the thing is, there's only so much you can try and get people to eat the greens. Mm-hmm. Like, people just want to see, like, dumb shit, like, whatever. Like, I'm paraphrasing, but I get that loads. Like, whenever I do an episode, people are like, "Oh, can't you fuck off with the political stuff? Like, can't you?" And I'm always a bit like, luckily for you, 99% of the media doesn't cover this stuff. So if you're bored of what I do, I mean, you can literally take your pick. Like, you can go and there's a million podcasts that don't cover this stuff. There's a million, like, literally the rest of the media doesn't do it. Yeah. So why has it got to be a binary all or nothing thing? Why can't it just be like, because like you say, I've always just fundamentally disagreed that there's with the contention, which is the other thing that you hear. People don't want to hear it. There's no appetite for it. Don't agree personally. I think when you're younger, you don't really give a shit. You're just interested in, like, who's doing what, what the pros are doing, blah, blah, blah. But I think if you've got a brain and you get older, your relationship to this stuff changes and what you get out of it changes. So therefore, I just think there's room for more than one conversation personally, which I think I've tried to sort of do a little bit of.
You've done a great job of it, and for our listeners, like, they should all tune into Looking Sideways podcast. I think it's really insightful. There's such great interviews. You have a really great way of approaching your guests as well. One of the things I found interesting in doing research is, like, how you do approach your podcast and the fact that you're not as ambitious as you once were when you were younger, I guess, with things. And like, I took this quote, like, and from you, and to be honest, all along I did just do it to please myself. You were careful not to start setting too much store by it. When you're younger, you have a creative project, you start thinking, I really hope this succeeds, whereas this has been just something for you almost in some ways. And that's kind of how I look at doing this podcast as well. It's just my opportunity to talk about surfing in a really fun way with lots of different people, once a week at least, I love the fact that you have an effortless effort approach to it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really sort of perceptive point, really. I think that just comes down to like the paradox that's at the heart of creativity, isn't it? You know, like when you're, I mean, I've always been somebody who's just tried to do stuff, you know, like I've been in bands, I've made music, I've written books, I've written film scripts, you know, like I've always just done stuff like through my life. And there was definitely certain points when I set way too much store by how successful those things were going to be. Which again, I think is something that you do when you're younger.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of feel like, especially if you're really putting yourself out there by doing something like music, for example, or by doing, you know, by really like try to express yourself in a particular way creatively. I think you've sort of, in my case, I really felt like the wanting it to be a success was part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I sort of began to, I'm not even going to say realize, just what I began to think was that actually wasn't helpful. And that the paradox of it is, the more you want it, the more inhibiting that is to actually create something decent, you know, because, and I sort of think that's a lesson everybody has to learn at some point. And that definitely took me a while to learn. And then as I got a bit older and I had a sort of few failures under my belt, which again, I just think is natural when you try to do anything. I was a bit like, yeah, actually, don't think that was helpful. Don't think I enjoyed it as much as I probably could have done, because I was just putting too much additional pressure on myself.
Yeah.
Because you know what it's like, if you're going to be successful, there's a huge element of luck involved as well. You know, you can.
I think almost 95% is luck sometimes. You know, for some people.
So it was quite a lot to do with that, really. Like I kind of, when I had the idea to do it, the Looking Sideways, I was just quite determined, like, not to make that same mistake again. And similarly, like when I wrote a film script, which was about 5 years ago, which I just kind of did to do it, really. Like I didn't even really show it to anyone. But I think 10 years before, I would have been like, right, I'm going to send this off to people, and it's going to get made, and it's going to be like, and unless it gets made, it's not got any value. Whereas now I just think you do stuff for the sake of it, and if it leads anywhere, then you just have to see that as a happy consequence of the of the act itself. And I think that this is the paradox, is when you make good stuff that people care about, really.
Well, it forces you, when you do that, you're really focusing on the process as opposed to the end result. And I feel like more often than not, when you're focused on the process, you're happier at the end. Whereas if you have an expectation of that end result, you're not focused on the process, so maybe you're not doing it as great as you could, because you're always thinking about that end piece instead and what it'll mean to you. And, you know, and I think it's important to just be present almost as you're doing whatever project you're working on, and just try to enjoy that.
Well, I mean, that's ego-led, isn't it? Which again is a sort of classic youthful error. And let's be honest, people can smell it a mile off. Yes. You know, like it doesn't matter what it is. Like if you're a punter looking at somebody do something, and you can smell the desperation sometimes, and that's never a good look, is it? You know,
no, definitely
so,
not.
I don't think I would have been able to do the podcast so if I hadn't have approached it in that way, because I was definitely quite nervous about doing it, for a few reasons. And I think if I hadn't have approached it in that way of like, actually, who fucking cares? Just do it because it's something that you want to do, I probably wouldn't have done it, I don't think.
Yeah. Now, what's the hardest part about podcasting for you? What's been the most difficult thing, absent of having to listen to your own voice?
Well, I think probably this thing that we're talking about, like not worrying about that's definitely the thing I have to guard against the most. Yeah, there are like practical things, like when you have an interview that doesn't go well, or whatever, like, or parking it, so get parking the imposter syndrome when you talk to particular people. There are all those sort of specific tangible things, but I think generally it's like not, social media is not great for this, is it? Like for helping you park the ego and just enjoy things for their own sake, because I'll do episodes that I've thought were amazing, thought were the best thing that I've ever done, and then they don't get as much pickup as like the shockingly bad interview that I did with Alex Nost, so because people are attracted to the name, so like, and obviously that's a bit of a funny thing, isn't it? Because you're like, well, I did an interview with Tim Baker last year, who I'm sure you know.
I love that one.
I
love that one. So
I mean, that was one of my favorite ever ones. I thought it was, and it just didn't really get anywhere near the pickup that the others got, because he's just not that well known. And I find it hard to take, sometimes I take that a bit personally, like, and I think anyone does. I think, so that's the hardest thing. Like, all that spiel I just came out with about like, do it for yourself, like blah, 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 all that sort of fucking Instagram ready sloganeering.
Yeah.
Like, everybody in the world is susceptible to that stuff. And particularly when you're putting stuff out on social media and you've got this very handy metric that tells you how popular you are and how much people like your stuff. So I think that's definitely the hardest thing. And like this summer, I've consciously had to not worry about that. I've almost like had to hold my nerve a little bit, because there's no doubt that if I do episodes about issues rather than personalities, they just get less pickup. But for me, they're the most valuable ones, and they're the ones that are the whole point of doing it. So there's been a few points when I've been a bit like, I find myself going, oh fuck, maybe I should try and get Tony Hawk on again, like, and I'm just trying to guard against that, because the 9 Club exists for that. Like the bomb hole exists for that in snowboarding. Like there are people that are already doing that really, really well.
Yeah.
And there are people that are but I think it's human nature to try and compete with that sometimes, and to be like, well, why am I, I should have Kelly Slater on here. I should have,
or you find yourself being like, I'm such a better interviewer than these people. Come on. Come on, Dave.
It's human nature.
How could you not know this information,
Exactly. It's human nature. It's like, so I think that's the hardest thing, to just park that, and just be happy that there's enough people that are interested and that can do what I do, and still have the luxury to be as massively self-indulgent as I often am on the podcast, by doing like really niche, esoteric conversations about, and that still finds an audience. So what I should be saying is like, how lucky am I? Like I just did a fucking 2-hour conversation with one of my best mates about,
is
the most niche
job
topic in the world, and and there's loads of people around the world that seem to want to listen to it. That's so that's the battle, I think, isn't it?
Well, that's where I think, like, this podcast has been great in the sense that I tend to focus on a local market, like just New York surfers for the most part, with every once in a while getting a big wig like you coming on, but it helps, but for me, it's kind of like, okay, my expectations are kind of low. Like, we're probably not going to get a huge reach. But if I stoke out a local person here and their friends, that's kind of awesome in many regards. Like, I love that. Like, I used to love getting Eastern Surf Magazine, because there was always a chance that me or one of my friends could be in it. We could be mentioned in it, or there could be a photo, and, it's not surfing, but shoots, man, like anyone can be on this in some ways. And that kind of, you get your little listeners for it, and people get psyched on it, and you get your little comments and get that little buzz, because you've stoked out maybe a smaller group, but they're really stoked on it and appreciate it more. So that's where I've been lucky with